The moment everything changed. From the very first second, the feeling in the room was strange, heavy, and full of something that no one could explain. People whispered quietly, not because they were gossiping, but because they sensed something rare was about to unfold. It was the kind of atmosphere that makes the heart slow down and the breath deepen. Keanu Reeves had arrived early, earlier than anyone ever expected him to. He walked into the private studio with a calmness that hid something deeper, something that almost felt like a storm waiting behind gentle clouds. He carried the same kindness he always did, but there was a quiet weight resting on his shoulders. The team knew he was here for an interview, but no one knew that today he would finally speak a truth he had kept inside for years, a truth that involved Sandra Bullock, a truth that would make Hollywood silent. As he stepped in, the soft orange lights reflected gently on his face, showing a mixture of peace and conflict. He greeted everyone with the same warm humility he was known for, but there was something different in the way he looked around, something searching, as if he was preparing himself for a moment that had already been delayed too long. One of the producers walked up to him and asked if he wanted anything to drink. He smiled, a small, grateful smile, and shook his head. He said he was fine, even though his voice sounded a little quieter than usual. The producer walked away with the sense that maybe this interview would not be just a normal conversation. Something inside him told him that Keanu's heart was fuller than his silence. From the other side of the studio, a large monitor displayed photos from Keanu's career. His early roles, his iconic scenes, his behind-the-scenes moments with friends and co-stars. The images moved like a quiet slideshow, each one capturing different chapters of his life. When the picture of Sandra Bullock appeared, even the air seemed to pause. The two of them smiling on the set of their legendary film, their eyes reflecting a connection people still talked about today. It was the kind of photo that carried a story behind it, a story that millions wished they understood. Keanu looked at the screen, and for a moment his usually steady eyes softened, and something emotional moved just beneath the surface. The technician operating the screen noticed it too, but pretended not to. Keanu walked slowly toward his chair, the one placed right in the center of the set. It was designed for long interviews, comfortable but firm, supportive but not too relaxed. He sat down, placing his hands gently on his lap, fingers crossed loosely, as if that helped him hold himself together. The interviewer, a calm and respectful man who had spoken with countless celebrities, walked in with a warm smile. He could feel the unusual energy in the room the moment he entered. He shook Keanu's hand and thanked him for being there. Keanu nodded, appreciating the sincerity. He had agreed to this interview for a reason. He wanted to talk, but not about a movie, not about an award, not about a rumor. He wanted to speak about something that had lived in his heart for a long time, something he rarely allowed himself to explore out loud. The cameras were adjusted, the microphones tested, and the lights aligned. Everything was almost ready. But even before the first question was asked, the viewers watching this story unfold later on YouTube would already be drawn in. They would sense the calm tension. They would feel the emotional buildup inside the room. They would see Keanu's eyes holding something unspoken. They would know deep down that the next hour would reveal something raw, honest, and unforgettable. Once everything was set, the director lifted his hand, signaling the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked softly, and the interviewer took a slow breath before beginning. He started with gentle questions, the kind that allowed Keanu to settle into the moment. They talked about his journey in Hollywood, the challenges he had experienced, the kindness he always tried to bring into the world. Keanu answered with his usual humility, speaking quietly but with purpose. Every sentence held meaning without being dramatic. But still, there was something else, something sitting behind his words, something waiting to surface. It was as if Keanu was slowly walking toward the heart of the story, step by step, careful but intentional. After a few minutes, the interviewer leaned back slightly and shifted the tone. He mentioned how people often admired Keanu not only for his acting, but also for his compassion, empathy, and honesty. Keanu smiled softly, almost shyly, because he never liked being praised for the things he felt were simply natural. But then, the interviewer gently mentioned Sandra. He brought up how fans had always felt a certain warmth between them, how their chemistry both on and off screen had touched people deeply, how their friendship had become something almost legendary. The moment her name left the interviewer's mouth, Keanu's expression changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that startled anyone, but in a way that only people who paid attention would notice. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and at the same time his eyes grew more distant, as if he was looking back into years of memories. Memories that were gentle, beautiful, complicated, and filled with unspoken meaning. The interviewer continued carefully. He asked Keanu what it was about Sandra that made their bond so special. It was a respectful question, asked with sincerity, not gossip. Keanu lowered his gaze for a moment, took in a slow breath, and exhaled as if releasing something he had held for a long time. Then he lifted his head again and began speaking. He spoke softly, describing Sandra as someone with rare light inside her, someone whose presence made people feel seen and valued, someone who carried strength not through loudness but through calm resilience. He said she had a way of making others feel safe, and he admired her for that. Every word he said came from a place of deep respect, and as he spoke, the room grew even quieter, almost reverent. The interviewer listened carefully. He asked Keanu if there was a moment during the filming of their first movie together when he realized their connection was special. Keanu's lips curved gently, as if the memory had just touched him again. He said yes. He said it happened during a break in filming when the two of them sat on a low concrete step behind the set. The sun was warm, but not too warm, and the air was fresh. Sandra had been laughing about something simple and silly, something only the two of them remembered. And in that moment, Keanu felt a sense of calm he had never felt before. It was as if the noise of the world had quieted for no reason except to let him hear her laugh. But he also said he didn't know what to do with that feeling back then. He didn't know if it was a sign of something bigger or just a beautiful moment shared between two growing actors. He said he valued their friendship too much to risk making things complicated. He didn't want to change anything that could hurt her. And so he kept that feeling inside, letting it become a quiet part of him, something he looked back on fondly but never acted on. The interviewer leaned slightly forward. He asked if Keanu ever wondered what would have happened if he had spoken up back then. Keanu hesitated. His fingers lightly tapped the armrest, and his eyes softened to a deeper shade, as if he was searching for the right words. He said that there were times when he thought about it, but he didn't regret the choices he made. He only regretted the moments when he didn't fully express what he felt or when he held back because he was scared of creating complications. Then came the moment when the interviewer asked the question that shifted the entire energy of the room. He asked Keanu if he ever felt that Sandra understood the things he could never say. The question was gentle, almost whispered. And as soon as he heard it, Keanu's breath paused. His eyes glistened faintly, not enough to be called tears, but enough to show that something had been touched deeply. After a long moment, Keanu nodded. He said he believed she did understand him, even when he said nothing. He said Sandra had a way of seeing people with her heart, not just her eyes. She understood silence, not just words. And maybe, he said softly, that was why their bond stayed strong for so many years, because she didn't need him to say everything out loud. She just felt it. But then he added something that shifted the emotional direction of the entire interview. He said there was one truth he never had the courage to speak about publicly. One truth he always kept tucked away, partly to protect himself and partly to protect her. And as he said this, everyone in the room felt the shift. The sound of a light buzzing in the corner suddenly seemed louder. The soft hum of the air conditioner felt sharper. The breaths of the crew became slower. Something important was coming, something real. The interviewer waited carefully, giving Keanu time to gather his thoughts. Keanu looked down for a moment, rubbed his hand gently along his jaw, and then lifted his head again, his eyes filled with years of unspoken emotion. He said that the truth was not dramatic or scandalous. It was simple, quiet, and human. He said that the truth was that there was a moment, years after they finished filming together, when their paths crossed again unexpectedly. He didn't say where it happened or what day it was, but he described the feeling of seeing her again. He said the second he saw her smile, he realized how much he had missed her without even knowing it. He said that moment changed him in a small but meaningful way. It reminded him of something he never fully acknowledged, something he always kept at the edge of his heart, something he didn't dare explore because he didn't want to risk hurting their friendship. The interviewer listened carefully, but he also sensed that Keanu was nearing a boundary, a personal emotional edge. He asked softly, almost hesitating, what that unspoken truth was. Keanu looked at him, then at the camera, then down again. His voice grew lower, slightly heavier, but still calm. He said that the truth he never spoke was that he once considered telling Sandra something he had never told any co-star before. Something simple, but something that came from the deepest part of him. He said he wanted to tell her that there was a small, quiet part of his heart that always moved differently when she was near. He never used the word love, not directly, but the meaning was there, soft and unmistakable. The interviewer didn't interrupt. He didn't even move. He let Keanu speak freely. Keanu continued. He said he stayed silent all these years because he wanted to protect the kindness between them, the respect they had built. He didn't want anything to disturb the gentle trust they shared. But he also said that silence sometimes becomes its own weight, and he had carried that weight for so long that it became a part of him. The room stayed completely silent. Not a single phone vibrated. No one shifted in their seat. It was as if the walls were listening too. Keanu's voice softened further when he added that he didn't know how Sandra felt during those years, but he always hoped she understood the truth behind his quietness. He said he always hoped that she knew he cared, even when he said nothing. The interviewer nodded slowly. He knew the audience would feel this moment deeply because it was real, human, vulnerable, and respectful. It was not about drama. It was about the emotional honesty that people rarely hear from celebrities, and Keanu had just opened a door that had stayed closed for decades. Then, as the interviewer prepared to ask his next question, Keanu suddenly paused. Something flickered across his expression, something almost like hesitation mixing with realization. He looked at the interviewer and said that there was something else, something he had never told anyone, something connected to a day that changed everything for him and Sandra. Something he had kept in his heart for years, unsure if speaking about it would help or cause trouble. The interviewer's eyebrows lifted slightly. The crew leaned forward, trying not to show that they were anxious. Even the director sitting behind the monitors felt a sudden tension grip his chest. Keanu took a slow breath, his hands tightening slightly on the armrest. His eyes grew distant again, as if he was standing in two timelines at once, the present, and a memory that still carried weight. The interviewer whispered gently, asking him what that moment was. Keanu opened his mouth to speak. And then he stopped. He blinked once slowly and looked toward the ground as if he was trying to decide whether to reveal something that might change how people saw everything. His silence, his bond with Sandra, and the truth he held inside. He lifted his head again, eyes darker with emotion. And just when he prepared to speak the words he had held inside for years, the director suddenly raised his hand, signaling a pause in the recording. Keanu froze, the words hanging at the edge of his breath. The room tensed. The truth he almost spoke. The moment the director lifted his hand and called for a pause, something inside the room cracked open, as if a thread holding the atmosphere together had been pulled too sharply. Keanu froze mid-breath, his expression still carrying the weight of the words he had almost spoken. The silence stretched for a few seconds, long enough for everyone to feel that something delicate had been interrupted. The crew members tried not to make eye contact with one another, but it was obvious that all of them sensed the same thing. Whatever Keanu had been about to reveal was not small, not casual, not something you hear from a Hollywood actor in a normal interview. It felt deeper, personal, and possibly life-changing for him. The interviewer turned toward the director with a confused but gentle expression, unsure why the pause had been called exactly at that moment. The director cleared his throat and walked forward, pretending to adjust a cable even though nothing was wrong with the equipment. He wanted to give Keanu a moment, maybe to breathe, maybe to reconsider, maybe to steady himself. He knew that when someone is about to open a piece of their heart, timing becomes fragile. 1 second too soon or too late can change everything. Keanu exhaled slowly, blinking as if waking up from a heavy dream. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm the emotions swirling inside him. He wasn't angry about the pause. He understood that this was part of filming, but he also knew that he had been right on the edge of saying something he wasn't sure he had the courage to repeat if the conversation didn't flow naturally in the same direction again. Sometimes, emotional truths require a perfect moment to come alive. If that moment slips away, the truth may hide again. The interviewer leaned a little closer and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Not as a host, not as a reporter, but as a human being speaking to another human being who just stepped onto an emotional cliff. Keanu nodded, though his eyes were still full of something unspoken. "Yeah," he whispered, "just thinking." The room stayed quiet, giving Keanu space. No one rushed him, no one asked for a repeat. They all sensed that this wasn't a typical interview where scripted answers could be paused and resumed. This was real, raw, maybe even a confession that had been waiting years to breathe. After a minute, the director gave a small thumbs up, signaling that they were ready to resume. The red light above the camera blinked on again, glowing softly as the silence settled into something heavier, deeper, yet strangely calm. The interviewer took a careful breath before continuing. He didn't ask the next question immediately. He didn't want to push Keanu too quickly. Instead, he waited, letting the moment rebuild itself. And then, with gentle honesty, he asked, "Before the pause, you were about to say something important, something that felt like it had been inside you for a long time. Do you want to continue?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. Keanu looked down, his fingers curling and uncurling slowly. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet but steady. "I was," he said, "but it's not easy to talk about." The interviewer nodded. "Take your time. We're here to listen, not to pressure." Keanu took a deep breath, let it out, and finally lifted his eyes. "There was a moment," he began, "a moment between me and Sandra, something that happened years after we worked together. I never talked about it because I didn't want people to misunderstand. I didn't want to create drama or take away from the friendship we had. But that moment stayed with me. It changed the way I looked at everything." He paused again, not from hesitation this time, but from the weight of memory. "We met by accident," he continued, "in a place where neither of us expected to be. It wasn't a set, it wasn't a studio, it wasn't even an event. It was just a normal day, a quiet day, and I saw her before she saw me." The interviewer leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle. "And what happened?" Keanu smiled faintly, a soft sorrow mixed with fondness. "She was standing by herself, looking out at something. I couldn't tell what it was at first. Maybe the sunset, maybe the sky, maybe she was just lost in her thoughts. And when I walked closer, she turned and saw me. And the way she smiled, it was like no time had passed at all. It felt warm. It felt honest. It felt like seeing a part of my past return, but in a way that felt comforting instead of painful." He rubbed his hands together slowly, remembering. "We talked for a long time, hours maybe, about life, about the things that changed us, about the things we learned. And at one point she looked at me in a way that made me wonder if maybe she felt something too, something deeper, something we both never said." The interviewer asked quietly, "Did she say anything that made you think that?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, she said she always felt safe around me. She said she liked the way I listened. She said she trusted me in a way she couldn't explain, and she said something else, something that stayed with me." The interviewer waited, knowing the next part mattered. Keanu's voice grew softer. "She said she sometimes wondered what would have happened if our lives had aligned differently, if timing had been kinder, if we had understood each other earlier. And she didn't say it as regret. She said it as a quiet truth." The entire crew felt their chests tighten. It was the kind of moment people dream of hearing about, two people who respected each other deeply, speaking honestly without trying to impress the world. It was human, real, gentle, and painfully beautiful. The interviewer swallowed and asked, "Did you tell her how you felt?" And this time, Keanu's expression changed. Not in fear, not in pain, but in a deeply human way, like someone remembering a crossroads they never dared to touch. He shook his head. "No, I didn't." Silence grew again, but it was a silence full of heartbeats and breath, not emptiness. "Why not?" the interviewer asked softly. Keanu's eyes drifted toward the floor before he answered. "Because sometimes silence feels safer. Sometimes you care about someone so much that you don't want to risk changing anything that might hurt them. Sometimes the fear of losing what you already have feels bigger than the hope of gaining something more. I didn't want to confuse her. I didn't want to make her carry anything more. She had her own life, her own path, and I respected that." He sighed softly, and maybe I was scared too. The interviewer didn't speak. He didn't need to. Keanu's honesty was enough to carry the moment. Keanu continued after a moment. "But that day when we talked, something small happened. It was subtle, but it stayed with me. When we said goodbye, she hugged me. A long, quiet hug, the kind of hug that says more than words. And when she pulled away, she touched my arm gently and said, 'You know, you've always been one of the people who made me believe in kindness again.'" His voice trembled slightly at the memory. "And I think that was the moment I realized that the bond we had wasn't just chemistry on screen. It wasn't just friendship. It was something rare, something built on mutual respect and softness, something we both felt but never named." The interviewer breathed slowly, absorbing the weight of what he was hearing. "And after that, did you stay in touch?" Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "We did, but life moved fast. Projects, responsibilities, pain, healing. Sometimes we drifted apart. Sometimes we reconnected. And every time we talked, even if it was just for a few minutes, I felt the same calm I felt years ago when we sat on that concrete step behind the movie set." The interviewer asked something that took the conversation even deeper. When people talk about your connection with Sandra, it's usually in a playful or romantic way. But listening to you now, it sounds like it was something much more meaningful, something that shaped you. Keanu's eyes watered slightly, but he didn't look away. She did shape me, not in a dramatic way, not in a life-changing moment, but in small, gentle ways. She reminded me that kindness matters, that honesty matters, that people can be both strong and vulnerable at the same time. She taught me that being seen doesn't always have to be overwhelming, it can be comforting too. Then he added something unexpected. And there's something I've never said publicly, something she did for me without even realizing it, something that changed a very difficult chapter of my life. The interviewer leaned closer, sensing the gravity in Keanu's voice. What did she do? Keanu took a long breath. She helped me through a moment of grief without knowing she did. The room's temperature seemed to drop slightly, as if the air itself understood the emotional depth of that sentence. He continued gently. There was a time when I was struggling quietly. I didn't talk about it. I didn't want people to worry. But she reached out to me randomly on a day I really needed someone. She didn't know. She just felt like checking in. We talked about simple things. We laughed. And something about that conversation helped me breathe again. It gave me strength when I felt like I had none left. His voice trembled again. That's the kind of person she is. The interviewer nodded slowly, his own voice soft. It sounds like she was there for you in ways even she didn't understand. Yeah, Keanu whispered, and I never forgot that. For a moment the room filled with a deep, heartfelt silence, the kind that truly holds meaning. Then the interviewer asked the question that pushed everything toward a new emotional peak. Is that why you said earlier that there was something you never told her? Does it have to do with that moment? With that grief? Keanu swallowed slowly. Yes, he whispered, it does. He looked directly at the interviewer, then at the camera, then down again, as if trying to steady the emotional storm beginning to rise inside him. And there's something else, he added quietly. The crew tensed again. The interviewer waited. Keanu's voice dropped lower, more fragile. The truth is, something happened after that day. Something that involved Sandra, something I never expected, something I never told anyone. The interviewer opened his mouth to ask, but before he could, Keanu looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear, memory, and something deeply emotional. And that moment, he whispered, is the one that changed my life forever. Before the interviewer could respond, before the crew could shift, before the director could cut, Keanu took a trembling breath, preparing to reveal the part of the story no one had ever heard. And the screen abruptly cut to black. The day everything shifted. The screen going black wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't a dramatic editing choice or a technical fault. It was something else, something that even the crew didn't expect. When the monitors flickered and the cameras froze for a second, everyone in the room exchanged anxious looks. The director raised both hands, signaling the camera operators to hold their positions. The sound technician tapped his headset, confused. The lights dimmed slightly, not enough to cause panic, but enough to remind everyone that even machines can sense tension when human hearts carry too much of it. Keanu sat quietly in the center of it all, not startled, not worried, but deeply absorbed in his thoughts. It was almost as if the brief blackout gave him one more moment to decide if he truly wanted to reveal what he had been carrying for years. His breathing deepened, and he rubbed his palms gently on his knees, grounding himself. The interviewer leaned forward with concern, ready to ask if he was all right, but stopped when he saw Keanu's expression, a calm, controlled stillness that looked almost sacred. After a few seconds, the lights steadied, the cameras hummed softly again, and the monitors returned to life. The director exhaled slowly, then nodded at the interviewer to continue. But the interviewer didn't speak right away. He looked at Keanu, searching for permission. Keanu met his eyes and gave a small nod, soft, reassuring, but also heavy with meaning. The interviewer cleared his throat gently. You said something happened after that day, he said softly. Something involving Sandra, something you never told anyone. Keanu inhaled deeply, the kind of breath someone takes when opening a door they've kept locked for years. He didn't rush. He didn't force his words. He waited until the weight inside him settled enough to be spoken aloud. That day, he began quietly, the day she called me without knowing I needed someone, something changed inside me. I didn't understand it then. I didn't know what to do with it. but I felt something shift, something I couldn't ignore anymore. The room leaned inward, not physically but emotionally. Every crew member felt the gravity of the moment, even though none of them knew where the story was leading. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't celebrity drama. It was a human truth, unfolding slowly, gently, painfully. Keanu continued, his voice low and steady. After that phone call, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not completely. Maybe not about everything, but about something important. Something I needed to say, not for romance, not for drama, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The interviewer asked, "What did you do?" Keanu paused, remembering, "I wrote her a letter." Every heart in the room seemed to stop for a moment. "You wrote her a letter?" the interviewer asked softly. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, I didn't want to call her because I wasn't sure I could say the words without stumbling. I didn't want to text her because it felt too small for what I wanted to express. So I wrote a letter, a simple one. No poetic lines, no dramatic sentences, just honest words." He looked down briefly, as if seeing the memory in his hands. "I told her thank you," he said gently. "Not just for the phone call, but for all the moments she had no idea she helped me through over the years. I told her that her kindness mattered more than she knew. And I told her that even though we were living separate lives, she had always been someone I deeply respected. Someone I trusted. Someone whose presence stayed with me long after the cameras stopped rolling." The interviewer asked carefully, "Did you tell her how you felt about her?" Keanu took another breath, deeper this time. "Not directly. I didn't say the thing I had been holding on to all those years. I didn't want to cross boundaries or complicate anything. But I did write one line that said more than anything else I could have written." He paused. The interviewer whispered, "What did it say?" Keanu's eyes softened, shaded with vulnerability. "I wrote, 'I hope you know that some people stay in your heart not because they're meant to be held, but because they're meant to guide you.'" The interviewer inhaled slowly, understanding the depth of that simple sentence. Keanu continued, "I didn't expect her to reply. I didn't even expect her to read it. I just needed to let those words go. I needed to release something I had kept inside for too long." The room stayed still, like a breath being held. "And did she respond?" the interviewer asked gently. Keanu nodded, and something in his expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and tenderness. "She did, but not in the way I expected." The interviewer leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Keanu's eyes lowered again before he spoke. "She didn't text me, she didn't call me, she didn't send a letter back. Instead, she came to see me." The room froze. Even the faint buzzing of a light bulb seemed to grow silent. The interviewer whispered, "She came to your place." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, she showed up at my door a week after I sent the letter. No warning, no message, just there." He swallowed slightly. "When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I felt something inside me shift again. She looked calm but emotional, like she had something heavy on her heart too." The interviewer asked quietly, "What happened?" Keanu leaned back slightly, remembering every detail with vivid clarity. "She walked into the living room and sat down without saying much. I could see she was nervous, and that made me nervous. My hands were shaking a little. It wasn't because I expected anything romantic or dramatic. It was because it felt like we were stepping into a new space, a space where honesty had to exist without fear." He paused for a moment, then continued. "She looked at me and said she read the letter 3 times. She said it made her emotional in a way she didn't expect. She said she understood more than I thought she would. And then she told me something I never imagined I would hear." The interviewer was barely breathing. "What did she say?" Keanu's voice softened as he repeated her words. "She said she always felt something between us too, not something that needed a label, not something that needed to change our lives, but something real, something she kept close to her heart, something she didn't talk about because she didn't want to risk the friendship either." The room shifted with an emotional exhale, though no one physically moved. Keanu continued, "She told me she knew I stayed quiet not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. She said she always appreciated that. She said it made her feel safe." He took a breath, his eyes glistening, and then she said something that stunned me. The interviewer's voice dropped even lower. "What did she say?" Keanu's jaw tightened gently. "She said, 'I don't know what our story is or what it was ever meant to be, but I do know that you were one of the few people who saw me during a time when I didn't even see myself.'" The weight of that sentence settled heavily over the room. "What did you say?" the interviewer asked hesitantly. Keanu hesitated himself, pausing as if walking through the memory with careful steps. "I told her the truth," he whispered. "I told her that I saw her because she never needed to be anyone else for me to see her. She was always just Sandra, kind, real, brave, and that was enough." The interviewer felt the depth of those words, but he sensed there was more. "And after that?" he asked. Keanu looked away for a moment as if the memory grew heavier. "After that, she stayed quiet for a long time. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the good kind of silence, the kind where two people understand each other without speaking." He took another breath, but then she said something that changed everything, something I still think about today. The interviewer leaned closer, almost afraid to interrupt the moment. "What did she say?" Keanu's eyes steadied, his voice becoming fragile yet firm. "She said, 'I wish we had talked like this years ago.'" The interviewer inhaled sharply through his nose, feeling the emotional impact of those words even without knowing the full story. Keanu continued, "I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Part of me wanted to ask her what she meant. Another part of me already knew." He looked at the interviewer, but before I could respond, she said something else, something that explained everything. The interviewer whispered, "What was it?" Keanu's jaw tightened again, his throat swallowing the weight of the moment. She said, "There was a day when I wanted to tell you something important, something honest, but I didn't, and I regret that." The interviewer felt the shift. What day was she talking about? Keanu closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "She was talking about the day we wrapped filming on our first movie together, the last day on set, the day when everyone was celebrating except her. She had something on her mind, something she wanted to say but didn't." The interviewer's heart thudded. What did she want to say? Keanu opened his eyes slowly, filled with a mixture of memory, tenderness, and a quiet ache. "She wanted to tell me that she cared about me," he said gently. "She wanted to tell me that there was something about our bond that felt different to her, something she didn't understand but wanted to explore." The silence that followed felt almost unreal. The interviewer finally whispered, "And why didn't she?" Keanu exhaled deeply, his eyes lowering. "She said she saw something in my eyes that made her think I wasn't ready. She thought I didn't feel the same way, so she stayed quiet, and I stayed quiet, and we both moved on, carrying something we didn't fully understand." The interviewer closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the emotional gravity. Keanu continued softly, "And then she told me something else, something that changed everything for me that night, something I never expected to hear." The interviewer looked at him slowly, carefully. "What did she say?" Keanu's voice shook as he whispered the next words. "She said, 'I think timing was never our friend, but maybe honesty can be.'" The room went completely still. No one moved. No one breathed. The interviewer swallowed hard and whispered, "And what happened after she said that?" Keanu's expression shifted, a mixture of vulnerability and something deeper, something almost painful. "That," he whispered, "is where everything changed." He leaned forward slightly. "And it's also the moment I never talked about publicly. The moment that shaped everything that came after. The moment I'm finally ready to speak about." The interviewer felt his heartbeat quickening. The entire crew froze again. And then Keanu whispered. But what happened next wasn't simple. His breath trembled. It wasn't gentle. He lifted his eyes, filled with memory and emotion. "It was the most difficult moment of my life." The interviewer inhaled sharply. "What happened?" he asked softly. Keanu exhaled slowly, preparing to reveal the part of the story he had hidden for years. But before he could speak, a sudden sound echoed in the studio. A door creaked open. Someone walked in. Everyone turned. Keanu's eyes widened. His breath stopped, and the room froze in disbelief at the unexpected arrival. The sound of the studio door opening was so sudden, so out of place, that every head in the room turned at the exact same moment. The door didn't slam or swing violently. It simply creaked open with a slow, steady movement, as if whoever was entering carried their own heavy silence with them. Even the lights seemed to dim slightly, not from electricity, but from the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Keanu's body tensed immediately. His posture changed, his shoulders straightened, and his eyes widened in a way no one had seen during the entire interview. He wasn't startled, he was frozen, as if his heart recognized something before his mind could catch up. The interviewer followed his gaze, confused, trying to understand why Keanu suddenly looked like he was standing at the edge of a moment he had run from or waited for. A quiet figure stepped through the doorway, the soft echo of their footsteps filling the room with a tension so thick that even the crew members felt it deep in their chests. The person didn't walk with confidence or hesitation. They walked with purpose, slow, gentle, steady, as if they knew exactly where they needed to be, even if the world around them didn't. And then the light shifted just enough for everyone to see her face clearly. Sandra Bullock. The room inhaled collectively. No one spoke. No one dared to. Because this wasn't planned. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't something coordinated with her team. This was something else entirely, unexpected, raw, and perfectly aligned with the emotional storm Keanu had been describing moments earlier. Sandra stood there quietly, her presence soft but undeniably powerful. She wasn't dressed for an interview. She wasn't wearing makeup for the camera. She looked natural, calm, and not the slightest bit concerned about how the world might see her. Her eyes moved slowly across the studio before landing on Keanu with a silent recognition that made the air hum. Keanu's lips parted slightly, not to speak, but because he had been thrown into a memory he didn't expect to relive. His breath stuck halfway in his chest. For years he had carried moments with her inside him, moments of kindness, silence, connection. But none of them prepared him for her walking into this room at the exact moment he was about to reveal the most difficult truth he had kept hidden. The interviewer's voice broke the silence, soft and almost hesitant. "Sandra, what are you doing here?" She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Keanu, her expression warm but serious. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, she walked further into the room, closing the door gently behind her. Then she spoke, her voice soft, steady, carrying a depth that made the entire studio lean in with their hearts. "I heard you were filming today," she said quietly, "and I had a feeling that maybe it was time." Her words weren't dramatic, but the weight behind them was enormous. Keanu blinked slowly, still frozen. The sound of her voice seemed to reach straight into a part of him he had locked away. She moved closer, step by step, not rushed, not hesitant, simply present. When she reached the space just beside the camera frame, she paused, her eyes never leaving his. "May I sit?" she asked gently. Keanu nodded slowly, almost mechanically, as if his body was responding before his mind could understand what was happening. The interviewer gestured to a chair they quickly brought in for her. Sandra sat gracefully, her posture calm but grounded. The interviewer looked between them, sensing something profound unfolding right in front of him. Sandra turned slightly toward Keanu and spoke again, her voice filled with a kind of honesty that made even the lights feel warmer. "I didn't come here to interrupt," she said. "I came because I think you're ready to say something you weren't ready to say back then, and maybe I'm ready to hear it." Keanu's breath wavered. No one in the room missed it. The interviewer, sensing the gravity, leaned back and kept silent, allowing the moment to belong to them. Keanu swallowed, trying to steady the emotion rising in him. "I didn't expect you to be here," he whispered. Sandra nodded softly. "I know, but sometimes life doesn't wait for the right timing. Sometimes it just brings us to the truth when we least expect it." He looked at her, really looked at her, the familiar warmth in her eyes, the gentle steadiness in her expression, the same presence that had comforted him years earlier without her even realizing it. "I was talking about that day," he said quietly, "the day you came to see me." Sandra lowered her gaze briefly. "I know," she whispered. The interviewer's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't known Sandra was listening, or how much she already understood. But somehow it made sense. Their connection had always been something deeper than the world could easily explain. Sandra lifted her eyes again, meeting his with a level of vulnerability that made the room feel smaller, closer. "I came that day because your letter touched something in me," she said. "But I also came because I had something to tell you, something I had been carrying for a long time." Keanu's chest tightened. "I know," he said. "You tried to tell me, and I—" "You didn't speak," she finished softly, "and that was okay." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, it was okay, because I froze, because I didn't know what to do with something I'd been avoiding for years." A quiet, fragile silence stretched before Sandra spoke. "Keanu, do you want to say it now?" she asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you don't have to hide anymore." The interviewer almost looked away, feeling like he was intruding on something holy. The crew lowered their eyes for a moment, respecting the intimacy of the moment unfolding before them. Keanu took a long breath, the kind that comes from deep inside the chest. His eyes softened, filling with something old, something tender, something that had lived silently in him for years. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't change his posture, he just spoke the truth. "That moment," he whispered, "was the moment I realized I cared about you in a way I couldn't explain, and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to lose you, I didn't want to break anything. So I stayed quiet, and that silence became a regret I carried for years." Sandra's eyes glistened, her lips pressing together softly as she listened. "But that isn't the whole truth," Keanu added quietly. "Not the part I never told anyone." The interviewer, the crew, the entire studio held their breath. Sandra leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling just enough for Keanu to notice. "Then tell me," she said. "I'm here now." Keanu looked at her, and for the first time during the entire interview, his voice cracked, not from weakness, but from a deep emotional truth he could no longer hide. "The night you came to see me," he whispered, "I was supposed to tell you, I was supposed to let you know what you meant to me, but something happened before I had the chance." Sandra blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "What happened?" Keanu hesitated, pain crossing his features. Then he said it. "I got a phone call," he whispered. "A call that changed everything, a call that made me push my feelings aside again, a call that made me shut down." Sandra's eyes softened with worry. "What kind of call?" Keanu looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "It was about someone I lost," he whispered. "Someone close, someone I wasn't prepared to lose, and that grief, it swallowed me. I couldn't speak, not even to you." Sandra's breath trembled. "Keanu." He looked up, eyes shining with emotion he never allowed himself to show publicly. "I wasn't silent because I didn't care," he said softly. "I was silent because I was broken." Sandra covered her mouth gently, the truth hitting her with a force she never expected. The room felt the weight, grief, timing, missed moments, unspoken feelings, all woven together into a single fragile thread. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "And that's the moment," he whispered, "the one that changed everything." The interviewer swallowed deeply, sensing that something even deeper was coming. "Because after that night," Keanu continued, "after I shut down and you left, something happened between us that neither of us ever talked about." Sandra's voice softened. "What happened, Keanu?" He looked at her, his expression a mixture of sorrow and truth. "You walked away," he said gently, "and you didn't look back." Sandra froze. Keanu whispered, "And that was the moment I realized how much you mattered to me." The room tightened. Sandra's eyes slowly filled with emotion, not surprise, not confusion, but something deeper. Regret. Long-held, quiet, aching regret. She looked down, wiping the corner of her eye. "Keanu," she whispered, "I didn't look back because I thought you didn't want me to." His breath caught. Her voice trembled. "I thought you needed space. I thought I was only making things harder. I thought I had read everything wrong." Keanu leaned back, stunned. The interviewer felt chills run through him. The two people at the center of this long, silent story had spent years holding the same fear. That they were the one who misunderstood, that they were the one who cared more, that they were the one who might ruin a precious bond. And then Sandra whispered the words that broke open the entire truth. "The real reason I came that night," she said shakily, "was because I finally understood something about us, something I didn't want to ignore anymore." Keanu's voice was fragile. "What was it?" Sandra lifted her eyes slowly, tears shimmering but controlled. "That I cared about you, more deeply than I knew how to admit." Keanu inhaled sharply. The interviewer's mouth fell open silently. The crew froze. Every heart in the room pounded as Sandra breathed the next words slowly, painfully honestly. "And that night before the phone call, I was going to tell you." Keanu's breath collapsed in his chest, the truth hitting him with both beauty and regret. "But you never got the chance," he whispered, barely able to speak. Sandra nodded, her voice filled with quiet heartbreak. And neither did you. Then the room fell into a silence, so deep it felt like the whole world was listening. But the story didn't end there. Because Sandra took a slow breath, and her voice changed from regret to confession. "Keanu," she whispered, "there's something else you don't know." His eyes lifted. Her voice trembled again. "The night I walked away wasn't the last time I tried to tell you." Keanu frowned gently, confused. Sandra hesitated, then whispered, "There was a second chance." Keanu's heart skipped. The interviewer leaned in. The crew waited breathlessly. And Sandra said the words that would change everything in Part 5. "You never knew, but I came back. The return no one knew about." The words Sandra spoke drifted through the studio like a soft but powerful shockwave. "I came back." The moment those three quiet words left her lips, Keanu felt the air disappear from his lungs. He didn't blink. He didn't move. It was as if his entire body froze in the space between disbelief and a pain he didn't even know he had been carrying. The interviewer sat back slowly, his heart pounding even though this wasn't his story. And the crew, they were barely breathing. Everyone sensed they were standing in the middle of a truth that had been hidden in silence for years. Keanu's voice came out low, fragile, almost childlike. "What do you mean you came back?" Sandra looked down, hands clasped together tightly, her fingers trembling in a way she tried to hide. She took a slow breath as if pulling strength from somewhere deep inside. "That night," she whispered, "after you got the phone call, after you shut down, after I left your home, I didn't go far. I walked to the end of your street and then I turned around." Keanu's eyes softened with confusion and emotion. "Why?" Sandra swallowed, her voice breaking softly. "Because I felt like something was unfinished. I felt like I had left without saying what I truly came to tell you. I kept thinking about everything you wrote in that letter, every word that felt like you were letting me into a part of your heart you never opened before. I walked away, but halfway down the street, something inside me pulled me back. I couldn't leave like that." Keanu stared at her, stunned. "I didn't know." "I know," she whispered, "because when I came back, you didn't answer." Keanu froze. The interviewer's eyes widened. Sandra's voice shook with memory. "I stood outside your door. I knocked softly at first, then again and again, but you never opened. I waited for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. I thought maybe you fell asleep. Maybe you needed space. Maybe I misread everything. I felt foolish. I felt like maybe I had imagined the connection all this time." Her voice cracked slightly. "So I left, and I never told you. I didn't want to make you feel guilty for something you didn't do intentionally, and I didn't want to ruin the gentle understanding we had." Keanu leaned forward, his voice tight with emotion. "I didn't hear the knock. I swear I didn't hear it." Sandra nodded gently. "I believe you, but that moment, that misunderstanding shaped everything. It made me think you weren't ready. It made me think I was reaching too far, so I stepped back." Keanu closed his eyes, pain rippling through him. "I wasn't asleep," he whispered. "I was sitting on the floor in my room holding the news from that phone call. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was gone inside." Sandra's shoulders sank, her face softening with immediate understanding. "I wish I knew. I would have stayed. I would have waited. I would have helped you through it." His voice trembled. "I know, that's what hurts the most." The interviewer swallowed hard, sensing that the past was unfolding in front of them like a delicate, painful tapestry, woven from regrets that had stayed hidden for too many years. Sandra leaned back slightly, her expression touched with sorrow and tenderness. "We weren't wrong about each other," she whispered. "We were just standing on opposite sides of a door neither of us knew how to open." Keanu opened his eyes, looking at her with a mixture of regret and gratitude. "Timing," he whispered. She nodded softly. "Timing." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people finally touch the truth after years of walking around it. The interviewer finally spoke, his voice gentle, almost cautious. "So, that night became a missed chance for both of you." Sandra smiled sadly. "Yes, a very painful one." Keanu ran a hand over his face slowly, trying to steady himself. "I always wondered why you seemed distant afterward, not cold, just careful." She nodded. "I was protecting myself, and maybe protecting you too." I didn't want to put you in a position where you felt pressured or obligated to respond to feelings you weren't ready for. Keanu looked straight at her, his eyes filled with quiet intensity. I wasn't distant because I didn't care. I was distant because I cared too much. Sandra's eyes watered softly, but she didn't look away. I know that now. The interviewer leaned forward. What happened after that night? Did you two talk about it at all? Sandra shook her head. No, we drifted. We kept in touch, but it wasn't the same. The deeper conversation, we almost had stayed locked inside us, and life kept moving. Projects came, responsibilities came, losses came, distractions came, but the silence stayed. Keanu added softly, and the regret stayed too. The studio felt like it was holding a collective breath. Sandra spoke again, her voice soft. But the regret wasn't just about what we didn't say, it was also about something else, something I've never told you. Keanu's heart tightened. What is it? She hesitated, her fingers tightening together in her lap. After that night, there was another moment, another chance for us to talk honestly, and I let it slip away. Keanu frowned gently. When? Sandra exhaled deeply, her eyes dropping for a second. Years later, we were at an award show. It was late. You were standing backstage alone for a moment. I walked up to you. I came close, so close that I could feel the warmth of your shoulder next to mine. I almost said everything then, everything I didn't say that night. Keanu closed his eyes again, trying to place the memory. I remember that night, he whispered. You stood beside me, you smiled at me, but something in your eyes looked sad. Her voice trembled. I was scared, scared to break whatever balance we had left, scared to confuse you, scared that maybe I was too late. Keanu opened his eyes and whispered, You weren't too late. Sandra looked at him, her eyes shining. I didn't know that. Another long, emotional silence filled the room. And then the interviewer asked a question that changed the energy again, shifting it from regret to something even more delicate. If both of you cared, he asked softly, why didn't you try again? Why didn't either of you reach out and say what you really felt? Keanu's answer came first, quiet but honest. Because I thought she moved on, and because a part of me didn't feel worthy of the kind of connection we had. Sandra's voice followed, tender but painful. And I thought he didn't want to reopen something that was already shut. The interviewer nodded slowly, understanding the tragedy of timing, fear, and silence. But Sandra wasn't finished. She took another breath, this one deeper, almost trembling, and said something that pulled everyone in closer. There's something else, she whispered. There's a part of the story you never heard, something that happened after our second missed moment, something that made me step back because I didn't want to hurt you. Keanu looked at her with concern. Hurt me? How could you hurt me? Sandra looked away, gathering strength from the quiet around her. Because I found out something about you, something personal, something I wasn't supposed to hear. Keanu frowned gently. What did you find out? She hesitated. I overheard someone talking about you, about how you were struggling after another loss. I didn't know the details. I didn't know how deep it went. But I heard enough to understand that you were hurting again deeply. And I didn't want to show up with feelings when your heart was already carrying too much. I didn't want to add to your pain. Keanu's voice broke. You wouldn't have added to it. Her voice cracked softly. I didn't know that, so I stepped away. I chose distance instead of risk, and that decision became another regret. The studio felt heavier, the air thick with a mixture of empathy, heartbreak, and the echo of years where two people quietly loved each other in ways they never named. Keanu spoke softly. All this time you were protecting me. Sandra whispered, and all this time you were protecting me. Their eyes met again, two souls who had spent years orbiting around a truth they were both too gentle, too wounded, too careful to touch. The interviewer leaned in cautiously. But now, he said quietly, the truth is finally here. The misunderstandings, the missed moments, the silent feelings, all of it is out in the open, so what happens now? Keanu looked at Sandra with a vulnerability so open that even the crew felt it in their bones. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know what happens now, but I know what didn't happen back then. I know the conversation we never had. And maybe this is the moment to finally finish it. Sandra nodded slowly. I think so too. The interviewer sensed they were approaching the heart of the story, the moment Keanu had mentioned earlier, the moment that changed everything, the moment he had been carrying in silence for years. Keanu, the interviewer said gently, earlier you said that after she left that night, something happened between you that neither of you ever talked about. Something that changed everything for you. What was it? Keanu inhaled deeply, his eyes darkening with memory. Yes, he said softly. There's still one more part of that night, the part I never told anyone. Sandra's expression shifted with concern. Keanu, what happened after I left? He looked at her, his breath trembling. Something happened, he whispered. Something that made me realize how much I needed you, something that made me want to run after you, but I couldn't. Sandra swallowed. Why? Keanu lowered his eyes, voice breaking. Because right after you walked away, I collapsed. The room froze. Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu continued, voice shaking. I collapsed from grief, from shock, from everything inside me breaking at once. I collapsed on the floor, calling your name even though you were already gone. Sandra's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming. Keanu. And when I woke up, he whispered, everything between us had already changed. The interviewer couldn't breathe. Sandra's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me any of this? Keanu lifted his eyes, filled with years of hidden pain. Because I didn't want you to carry that weight, he whispered. And because I was ashamed that the moment you came to open your heart, I wasn't strong enough to open mine. Sandra's tears fell freely now, but her expression was pure tenderness. The interviewer leaned in one more time. And now, he asked softly, now that everything is finally out in the open, what truth were you about to share today before the pause, the truth that made Hollywood silent? Keanu turned slowly toward Sandra. His eyes softened with something deeper than love, deeper than regret, deeper than memory. Something final, something that had lived in his heart for too long. He took a trembling breath, opened his mouth, and spoke the first word. When suddenly, the studio lights flickered violently. A loud crack echoed above, and everything went black, the truth that finally found its voice. The moment the studio lights went out, the darkness felt alive, thick, and strangely intimate. Gasps echoed through the room, the kind that come not from fear but from the sudden break in a moment charged with emotion. Someone from the crew whispered anxiously about the power source. Another checked the cables blindly, while the interviewer sat perfectly still, knowing deep inside that the blackout didn't destroy the moment, it intensified it. It was as though the truth Keanu had held inside for years demanded a silence larger than the room itself. In the darkness, only the sound of breath filled the space. Nervous breaths, steady breaths, trembling breaths, and somewhere in the center of the room, two breaths that recognized each other even without light. Keanu and Sandra. In the dark, their connection felt clearer than it ever had under any spotlight. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, a soft emergency light flickered on near the back corner of the studio. It wasn't bright. It cast only a faint glow, enough to reveal outlines, not details. Enough to turn the studio into a silhouette world where truth could be spoken without fear of cameras or judgment. Keanu's face became visible again, half-lit, half-shadow. His eyes reflected the dim glow with a quiet intensity that made Sandra's heart tighten. She turned toward him instinctively, drawn not by confusion, but by a deep, emotional gravity that had existed between them for decades. The interviewer whispered, "Are you both okay?" Keanu didn't answer at first. He just kept looking at Sandra through the dim light, his expression raw, unguarded, stripped of every layer he had ever used to protect himself. Finally he spoke, his voice soft but steady. "I need to finish what I was saying." The studio fell silent again, not from darkness but from anticipation. Sandra leaned in slightly, drawn by something she couldn't explain. "Keanu," she whispered, "I'm listening." Her voice, trembling with care, was enough to push him forward. He took a deep breath, releasing years of pressure with a single exhale. "That night," he said quietly, "after I collapsed, I woke up on the floor alone. The house was dark. Everything was silent. And I felt something I never told anyone, something that scared me more than grief ever did." Sandra's brow softened. "What did you feel?" He looked down, his voice cracking with honesty. "I felt like I had lost you forever." Sandra's breath caught in her throat. "I thought," he continued, "that maybe you had walked away because you realized I didn't deserve you, or because you saw how broken I really was. I convinced myself that losing you was something I had earned, and that belief followed me for years. It shaped how I acted around you. It shaped the distance I kept. It shaped the silence between us. He lifted his eyes again, and the dim light revealed the pain he had hidden for so long. But the truth I was trying to say today, he whispered, the truth I've held inside all this time is that I never stopped caring about you. Not for one day, not for one moment. I tried to bury it. I tried to move past it, but it stayed, quietly, patiently, painfully. Sandra's eyes filled with tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. She leaned forward, her voice soft but trembling. Keanu, why didn't you tell me? He shook his head slowly. Because I didn't want to be another weight in your life. You were going through your own storms, your own losses, your own battles, and I wanted to be your safe place, not your burden. Sandra took a step closer, her voice breaking through the quiet. You were never a burden, you never could be. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the emotion rising inside him. But I didn't know that. I only knew the fear of losing you completely, and so I stayed quiet. I stayed back. I loved you from a distance I thought was safe. The word loved hovered in the air between them, soft but unmistakable. Sandra inhaled sharply, her heart shattering and healing at the same time. Keanu, she whispered, her voice cracking, you loved me. His answer came without hesitation. Yes, he whispered, I did, and a part of me still does. The room grew impossibly still. Not even the hum of the emergency light dared interrupt the moment. Sandra's tears rolled down her cheeks with a softness that broke Keanu's heart more than any memory ever could. She stepped closer, so close that the faint light cast their silhouettes together. I need you to hear something, she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. I never walked away because I stopped caring. I walked away because I cared too much. I was scared of hurting you. I was scared of losing you. I was scared that my feelings would be too heavy for someone who was already carrying so much pain. Keanu looked at her, stunned, as if hearing something he had waited years to understand. All this time, he whispered, you felt that way. She nodded. All this time. Keanu's breath shook, but he managed to speak. Then why didn't we ever talk about this? Why did we let years slip away? Why did we let silence speak for us? Sandra's voice cracked in the softest, most painful way. Because silence was easier than risking heartbreak. Because we were two people trying to protect each other without realizing we were hurting ourselves instead. The interviewer, who had been silent out of respect, finally spoke with a gentle, almost reverent tone. You both carried the same fear, he said softly, and it kept you apart. Sandra wiped her cheek slowly. I didn't want to admit it, she whispered, but yes, it kept us apart. Keanu leaned forward, his voice raw. And now? She looked at him with an expression that held years of love, regret, hope, and understanding. Now, the truth is finally out, after all this time, after all the missed moments, after all the silence. Keanu swallowed hard. And what do we do with that truth? Sandra didn't answer immediately. She took a slow breath, then stepped even closer until she was standing just a breath away from him. The dim emergency light traced the outline of her face, making her look like a memory brought to life. She lifted a trembling hand and gently touched his face. Keanu's eyes closed the second her fingers brushed his skin. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was human, raw, soft, a touch that carried decades of unspoken emotion. We don't change the past, she whispered. We don't rewrite what we lost. We don't pretend timing was kind to us, but we can honor what we felt. We can acknowledge what we were too afraid to say. He opened his eyes slowly, tears gathering in the corners. And what were we too afraid to say? Her voice shook on the words that finally freed them both. That we loved each other, she said softly. Even if we never acted on it, even if it wasn't meant to become something more, even if life moved differently than our hearts did, the love was real. Keanu's breath broke. Sandra added gently, and it still is in its own quiet way. The interviewer lowered his gaze, letting the moment belong to them completely. Keanu reached up, his fingers gently closing around her hand. I'm sorry, he whispered. For the silence, for the fear, for not opening the door when you came back. Even if it wasn't my fault, I wish I had known. Sandra smiled through tears. And I'm sorry for knocking so softly. I should have been braver. I should have stayed. Keanu shook his head, his voice full of warmth. You were brave, you came back. That's more bravery than I could have shown back then. They stayed like that for a moment, two souls finally standing without fear between them. Then Sandra pulled her hand away gently, but not out of distance, out of acceptance. Keanu, she whispered, our story wasn't meant to be about timing or romance or destiny. It was meant to be about connection, about kindness, about two people who understood each other in ways the world never knew. He nodded slowly, and it still is. She stepped back just enough to see him clearly. And now we can finally let go of the regret, not the connection, the regret. Keanu smiled softly, a warm, emotional smile that felt like a long-awaited sunrise in a dark sky. I can do that, he whispered, if you can. She nodded, I can. The interviewer, sensing that the emotional storm had settled into something peaceful and healing, asked quietly, Keanu, is this the truth you wanted to share today? The truth that Hollywood never knew? Keanu looked at Sandra one more time before answering. Yes, he whispered. The truth is, Sandra Bullock has been one of the most important people in my life, not because of love stories people create, not because of rumors, but because of the kindness she brought into my world, the gentleness, the understanding. She helped me heal without knowing she did. She stood by me in moments I couldn't carry alone, and even when we drifted apart, I carried her with me. Sandra's eyes softened with emotion she didn't hide. Keanu continued, his voice filled with peace. And today, I finally spoke the truth I've held for years, not to create headlines, not to shock anyone, but to honor what we shared, the kind of connection that doesn't fade, the kind of bond that changes you quietly and stays with you forever. The room felt lighter, as if the weight of years had lifted gently from both their hearts. Sandra took a step forward again, this time with a soft, relieved smile. Thank you, she whispered, for saying it. Keanu nodded. Thank you for being here to hear it. They shared a long, quiet look, not romantic, not painful, but deeply human and full of respect. The lights suddenly flickered again. Then slowly, the studio returned to full brightness. The truth had been spoken. The weight had been lifted. Their story, quiet, gentle, filled with love, regret, honesty, and healing, had finally found its voice. The interviewer whispered softly, Are you both okay? Sandra nodded, Yes, finally. Keanu nodded too, more than okay. And as the cameras captured the moment, two friends, two hearts, two histories intertwined in the most human way, the world would soon understand something Hollywood had misunderstood for years. This was never a love story filled with drama. It was a story of kindness, quiet connection, and two souls healing each other in ways only they could understand. The director lifted his hand. The cameras faded out gently, and the story ended not with grand declarations, but with peace.